Record it to the cloud. Good evening, everyone. This is Sharon Hawks at Nahant Public Library, and I'm happy to welcome you tonight to our book talk. And this time it's not an author talking about what he wrote, but it's about a book collector and antiquarian book dealer talking about the wonderful stories that have been involved in collecting, selling, and buying books over the years. Our special guest for tonight is Kenneth Gloss. He is the sole proprietor of the Brattle Bookshop. It's one of America's oldest and largest antiquarian bookstores. 2021, by the way, is the 72nd year of the Gloss family's ownership. Ken Gloss succeeded his late father, George Gloss, a well-known figure both in Boston and national antiquarian circles. He became the sole proprietor in 1985. Among the many organizations which Ken Gloss is a member of are the Antiquarian Booksellers Association of America, the International League of Antiquarian Booksellers, the New England Antiquarian Booksellers of America, the Massachusetts and Rhode Island Antiquarian Booksellers Association, the Committee for the Boston International Antiquarian Book Fair, and the Boston Society. He's also a fellow of the Massachusetts Historical Society, as well as serving on the board of overseers of the USS Constitution Museum. In other words, when it comes to history and books, Ken is there. And I'm happy to introduce him to you.
Well, thank you very much. And one of the things I will say, and I haven't written a book, I can talk about that a little, but I do a podcast called Brattlecast, and I speak better than I write. There's probably close to 100 episodes out, so you can get that through our website or through Apple. But if you like the stories I tell, I have lots and lots of them. I'll give a little bit of background of the store. The history of the store goes back to the 1820s, but for all practical purposes, it was going out of business in 1949. My father was getting married. My mother had $500. With that, they bought half interest in the Brattle Bookshop. It's always been in Boston. People are in Harvard Square. They say, "Where are you?" We tell them we're downtown. When my parents first bought the store, there was a little side street in what was Scully Square called Brattle Street. To make it more confusing, the street doesn't even exist anymore. It's where Boston City Hall Plaza is now. And my father built the store and his great love of books, his hard work, his knowledge. He was also a bit of a character and a showman. We've had 7 different locations over the years, mainly due to urban renewal. But when my father would move, when it was planned, he would move the best books to his new location. Then he'd run sales, half price, $1.50, quarter dime. Last day of the sale, though, everything was free. And he would literally have hundreds of people line up with bags, packs, satchels, whatever, ring a big bell. People go charging into the store, grab whatever they could grab. 5 minutes later, he'd ring the bell again. That group would leave. The next group would came in, and he gave away over 250,000 books that way. Now, the last time he did this, we were moving from the end of Washington Street near Boston City Hall to West Street, where we are now. And at the end of the giveaway, there were books left over. And like I said, my father was a bit of a character and a showman. And if you can sort of picture this, he hired a covered wagon with a cowboy and a horse team. And on the cover of the covered wagon, it said, "Go West, book lovers. Go 5 West Street, Brattle Bookshop." They filled it up with books. He drove it from the end of Washington Street, up Court Street, down Tremont by the Boston Common to where West Street is, and back down Washington Street with my father sitting in back, throwing books out the whole way. Now, the superintendent in charge of traffic told him he could do it all morning. But within an hour, the city was in an absolute standstill. They told him to stop. He didn't care. He'd gotten his point across. And we've been on West Street since then. When we first moved in, we were in a 5-story, 150-year-old wooden building, crammed full of books. In February of 1980, I got a call at 4 o'clock in the morning the building was on fire. It literally burnt to the ground. I mean, it was 100% gone. Now, but we wanted to continue to keep going, not go out of business. We found a storefront a few doors up the street. We rented folding tables. People either sold, gave us, donated books. Kevin White, who was the mayor at the time, came down with a carload of books. And even though it was a meager stock, the main thing was keep going. Within a month, we reopened. The next 4 years, we slowly but surely rebuilt the stock. 4 years after that, we bought the building we're in now, which again, is just a few doors down on West Street. And it's sort of the old Dickensian type of store. Outside stands at $1, 3 and 5, 2 floors of general used books, a 3rd floor with autographs, manuscripts, first editions, leather bindings, and so on. In that type of business, the large old general secondhand bookstore is a dying business. And it's not dying because people don't like books, read books, sell books, but particularly in the inner cities, property value has gone so high, that rent has gone so high, that old bookstores, which I can assure you are not the most efficiently run businesses in the world, one right after the other have gone out of business. And in the last 10 or 15 years, the internet has just speeded that along. Now, like I say, we own our building. I've been doing this, and I hope to do this for a long time to come. I have 2 daughters. They don't seem to have any great interest. I will say, we were talking before this, one of my daughters had a baby this morning. So I've got another grandchild, which even in the time of COVID, great things can happen. The one downside of that is she lives in Nairobi, Kenya, and it's going to be a few months before we can get on a plane and get out there. But a lot of the fun of being in the store is going out to houses and estates. It's never knowing who you're going to see, the people, the places, the characters. And I'll relate a few of those stories. And then I'll tell some more about other things that have come in, people and characters. Just this morning, I was down in New Haven looking at 20,000 art books in someone's house. One of the problems with having 20,000 art books from a book dealer's point of view, if we end up buying them, they're heavy. They weigh a lot. People don't realize that it's a very, very physical job. But in any case, I'll tell one story about one of our ex-employees. And he worked for us a long time ago, but he had just started, and he had been working for me for a couple of days. And an old man came into the store. Now, that old man was probably younger than I am now, but at that point, he was an old man. And he asked for an obscure author called Doniphan Yates. And I knew who Doniphan Yates was, went to the fiction section. We looked, there wasn't anything there. And I said to him, do you want to leave your name? He said, no, he left. My new employee comes up to me, he goes, does that man come in here often? And I said, first of all, I wasn't really paying that much attention, but no, I didn't, definitely not. He says, oh, well, that was J.D. Salinger. I used to date his daughter. And so again, you never know who's coming in. And a few house calls that we made that were interesting. I was out of the store. I got back. There was a phone call that a Mrs. Fisher had called and had some books. I called her up and she said, oh, yes, my father died in Providence. He has 500 art reference books. We want to get the best price we can. We're inviting a number of dealers down to bid on them. Would you be interested? Well, 500 art reference books sounds interesting. Providence is only an hour away. I mean, we've gone all over the country. We've driven, a few weeks ago, I bought 6,000 books in Philadelphia. So Providence is easy. They lived in an old street up near Brown University called Benefit Street. I got to the house. It was a large old colonial house. Got led through the house, into a courtyard, into a garage. Second floor of the garage, they had 5,000 books. Well, it turned out her married name was Fisher. Her father's name was John Nicholas Brown. Family founded Brown University, one of the wealthier families in the country. And after about 8 months, I bought 60% of 80, 70, 80% of the books I wanted. She was pleased. I was happy. And she said, my mother has a lot of books. Most are being given to the university. Some are being sold at auction, but would you like to go to Newport to take a look at the books there? Well, their house in Newport was one of the mansions on the ocean. I mentioned this to my wife. She decided to come with me on this deal. And one of the fascinating parts about it was being in one of these mansions that was still being lived in by a family. And at one point, wandering from the basement to the attic, all on my own, without a tour guide saying, come here, go here, do this. It was fascinating. Another time I got called to Newport to do an appraisal. Now, when I do talks like this, and I only wish that I could be doing this live, hopefully soon I will be able to, but I do lots of free appraisals. And anyone who has books, although we're not doing it live, can email, call, take pictures, whatever, and I'll give out as much free information as reasonable. My goal is that whenever you think of an old book, you think of me in the Brattle bookshop. I don't care if you think of 10 others, as long as I'm one of the 10. And one of the ways I feel I can do that is by giving out free information. But there are times when people need very formal written appraisals for insurance, estate, taxes, whatever. And then I discuss a fee. In any case, another mansion in Newport, not quite as big as the Browns. This was the Perry family, Commodore Perry, Oliver Hazard Perry. And what they had was a whole stack of papers from the War of 1812. During the war, their family were privateers. Well, they're privateers if you're on our side. They're pirates if you're on the other side. It's all the way you look at it. But it was the day-to-day accountings of the ships, and they were fascinating to read through. They would sometimes capture a ship and realize tens of thousands of dollars profit. 1812, that was an amazing amount of money. Then one day, one of the ships got into a battle. The ship got hit. The captain got hit. He lost his leg. 3 days later, there was a tiny entry at the bottom of the page, and it said, Captain, $5 bonus, loss of leg. And that was the last you heard of the captain. So it's a little different nowadays. When my father was still alive, and he died over 30 years ago, we got a call from a lady. She was very vague about her name, who she was, what she had, but it sounded like she might have something. She lived in Sharon, so it was close. We got to the house. It was a little ranch. Paint was peeling, weeds were growing. We sort of say, gee, what's going to be here? She answered the door. She was quite elderly. We walk in, and there were just gorgeous antiques everywhere. I mean, really, really beautiful antiques. She got to talking. It turned out she was originally from the Boston area, but she had married the Prince of the Ukraine, the cousin of the Tsar of Russia. He had escaped just before the revolution, and she told story after story about being Russian nobility in Europe and all the court intrigues and all the goings on, how T.E. Shaw used to stay at their house all the time, how she didn't think he accidentally died on a motorcycle. T.E. Shaw, of course, was Lawrence of Arabia. And she went on and on and on with these wonderful stories. Turned out her books were lousy, but the stories were absolutely wonderful. And when we first got into her house, on the wall, she had 10 watercolors. They were pastoral European scenes. When I first saw them, I thought they were nice. The more she talked, the longer we were there, the more I looked at them, the nicer I thought they were. And I finally said to her, those 10 watercolors, they're really nice. And she turned around and matter-of-factly said, oh yes, they're all Turners. So she had 10 original Turner watercolors, probably $1 million worth of paintings. It was sort of, oh yes, they're all, you never know the people, the places, the characters. And matter of fact, speaking of characters, a few years ago, we went to one of our customers' 100th birthday parties. Now, when you go to a man's 100th birthday parties, and he tells you he just got back from Barcelona, he's going to give a talk in Florida, and he's been asked to lecture in Tokyo. And I finally said to him, wait a minute, you're 100 years old. Don't you think Tokyo is an awfully long way to go? He said, well, when I used to work, it took me well over 25 hours to get to Chicago. He says, I don't think Tokyo is a whole lot further than that nowadays. And here's a man who can tell you about one day sitting down to dinner with Henry Ford and Thomas Edison. Obviously, he was a younger man at the time. He said he's looking forward to this dinner and all the learning and insight he was going to get from these two men. And he said he got to the table a little early, sat down. 5 minutes later, Ford came in and sat down next to him. And about 15 minutes later, Edison came in. Now, Edison was elderly, had one of those big horns for hearing, and sat down opposite. And he said the first thing Ford turned to Edison and said, yelled, "My Tom, you look very good." And Edison turned to Ford and yelled, "It's the Carter's little liver pills." This man said all night long, all they did was yell about Carter's little liver pills. And he said next time he wanted to learn something, he went to the library. Now, I can go on some of the houses and people. I'll tell one more specifically and then tell a few stories from there. At the store, we get hundreds of phone calls. People calling, do you have a book? Can you get a book? How hard is it to get the book? Does the book exist? Or what's the value? How much is it worth? And so on. Most of those questions, either I or the people I work with, we can answer right off the top of our heads. Some are a little more involved, and occasionally you really have to do some research, but that can be fun too. But every once in a while, you get a call that really stands out. And again, this was a while ago. I answered the phone. "Hello, Brattle Bookshop. Can I help you?" Lady, older, very thick Irish brogue. And the first thing she says is, "President Kennedy slept with me." Now, you have to admit that gets your attention. And she stopped and waited for it to sink in. And then she went on to explain that she had worked for the Kennedy family. And when he was 2 and 3 years old, he used to fall asleep in her arms. So he did sleep with her, but maybe not what you first think. And what she had was a whole series of handwritten letters from the president. Now, presidential letters of any type have value, but handwritten letters from a 20th century, later 20th century president particularly are hard to get. And she wanted to get an offer on them. I was skeptical about that, but I thought she'd be fun to meet. I went to her house. She was wonderful, great stories. The letters were fabulous. I gave her what I thought was a tremendous offer on them, much as I suspected, though. There was no way she could sell these letters. They were part of her life. I left a note behind. As far as I know, her family still has them. And maybe someday I'll hear about them. Who knows? One of the things that come up a lot, people sort of say, "What do you do with a library?" or "How do you know?" or what's, they call up and they want to sell books. And it's interesting because someone calls on the phone and the typical first response will be, we'll go, "Well, how many books do you have?" And they'll go, "A lot." And then we'll go, "Well, what kind of books do you have?" They'll go, "Fiction and nonfiction," which is every book ever done. But, we know that. So we try to narrow it down about how many books do you have? Is it 50, 100, 500, 1,000? Is there any particular subject or area? If someone calls us and says, "We have 200 books on the history of Nahant or the Boston area or the seacoast around here," that's usually a good collection because nobody has that many books on one subject without going into it. Another thing that has become technology has made is that people can send digital pictures. A lot of time, even right behind me, if you line them up on a shelf, take some digital pictures. If it's in focus, that's an important part. If it's in focus, we can look at it and a lot of times tell you, is it value, if it's well worth coming out, whether it isn't, give you a good idea. Or sometimes we can say the third book on the shelf from the right, we need to see more of that. So technology has actually helped and changed. And I could go on and on and on how the internet has changed the world, and it's changed it tremendously. One thing it's done is if a book was valuable just because of the information in the book 20, 30 years ago, it's probably gone way down in value because people don't need it. I mean, who buys encyclopedias anymore? Dictionaries, but it goes way beyond that. Uh, Art books, people, the value is plummeted because you buy a lot of these old or beautiful art books put out by these stores with a gorgeous, because you want to be able to look up in what a Van Gogh or a Picasso. But nowadays, if you have a good computer with a nice color screen, you don't need those books anymore. So that's brought that way down. Also, a lot of books that people thought were high priced and rare, they weren't really rare. They were just hard to get. So at that time, you would, before the internet, you would go out, and if you saw it in a bookstore, even if it was more than you wanted to pay, you'd say, I'll buy it because a year or two from now, I might need that book. And I need it to be on my shelf. You know, sort of the old picture of the professor sitting in their library surrounded by books. So at the touch, they could pull something down and get the information. Well, now you go click, click, and you get the information. One other thing that it's done is how-to books. You don't think of this, but I had a friend who retired, and he came in the store. He's a regular customer, a good friend. He said, you know, I've retired. I want to take up tennis again. Do you have any books on how to play tennis? We looked, and there were a couple. He goes, you know, YouTube's better because you can actually see the strokes. You can visualize what people are saying. But the one thing I will say about this, people say, well, you don't need the books. I'll tell you one thing you definitely do need in all of this is good librarians, good reference librarians. Because first of all, a lot of times you need to get by the first page on Google. The other problem with the internet is nothing is edited. So you really don't know how good that information is. So, you know, someone helping and guiding you to the right sites, the right places, if anything, I think you need more of that than less. You know, the internet is a tool. It's something, if you know how to use the tool and you're good at it, it's like any tool. It's a tremendous thing. You can make a lot of it. If you take a tool and you don't know how to use that tool, it's like everything else. It maybe isn't so good, or it's overwhelming, or you don't know what to do. So use your library. We get a lot of interesting things that come in the store, a lot of interesting calls. Or interesting people too. I got a large collection a number of years ago of cookbooks. It was about 2,000 cookbooks, and some of them dated back to the 1700s. Others were, it was just a great collection. But this sort of tells you how you can never tell how you make somebody happy. They had a lot of these little pamphlets like Bake a Chocolate Company, how to make Jell-O, how to bake a cake with flour, you know, all these little pamphlets. Some of them are really nice, very colorful. Some of them have some value, some don't, but we had a box full, and I just said to one of my assistants, put them all out on the dollar table. There were some bargains there, but we've got this great collection. We've got to spend our time on that. They put it out on the dollar table, and about 2 or 3 hours later, this one man comes running in with this one pamphlet, absolutely beside himself. I said, I've been looking for this for years and years. And he was just so happy. And he said, and it's only $1. And I mean, he just went on and on. And then I looked at it. The title was Coconuts and Constipation. So you never, ever know what's going to turn somebody on or what's going to make them happy. Going on another side of that, there are some people you can never make happy. I'm going to talk a little about Antiques Roadshow. I hope you watch it. I've been doing it for years. Matter of fact, the new season starts in a few weeks, and I know they had some great appraisals. I had some good ones too, but I won't toot my own horn. That's for you to decide. But my wife, for a couple of years, did the Antiques Roadshow, and this is to show that you can never satisfy anybody. Up until the last year or so, because of COVID, the way that show is done is you would go to either a convention center or a museum or a site 3 to 4, 5,000 people come to a show. Each person has 2 items. You do it on one day. So there's somewhere between 6 and 10,000 items that come in. And as an appraiser, you're there. You appraise from 7:30 in the morning, sometimes to 6, 7 at night. There are 3 book appraisers next to the jewelry, next to the posters, next to this. And in any case, you also know the people there are excited about being there. That many times they've been waiting in line. So even if a foot of 10 feet away, you can look and see what they have. You go, oh, that's not worth anything. You want to really touch it, hold it, show that you're concerned and care, and you do appreciate that they've been waiting that long. Anyways, my wife was there, and a lady brings in this book, and she's excited, and she says, I have a book signed by A. Lincoln. And my wife looks at it, she opens it up, she spends a minute or so looking it over, and she goes, it is signed by A. Lincoln, but not the A. Lincoln we both want it to be. And the lady goes, how can you tell? Well, my wife turns the page and she says, well, one clue is this book was printed in 1915. And the lady goes, so? And my wife goes, well, I learned in school that Abraham Lincoln was assassinated in 1865. And the lady slams the book shut and goes, you don't know what you're talking about, and storms off. So there are some people, no matter what you do, you can't make them happy. Now, one of the other things that I'll tell you about Antiques Roadshow is, maybe people don't realize this, but the appraisers, and there are 75, 80 appraisers at every show, we do not get paid at all. We pay our own airfare, we pay our own hotels, we pay our own meals, but it's a lot of fun. I mean, why would I ever go to Fargo, Boise, Omaha, and so on? But it's been an excuse for my wife and I to travel around the country. And anywhere you go in this country, if you have a little bit of time and you make any effort, it's gorgeous. And the people are wonderful. Don't talk about politics and religion, but it's great. It's gotten us out around the country. And my wife and I are lucky because we usually can go 2 or 3 days ahead of time and really see the area. Also, we become friends with all of the appraisers. So we go out to dinner and it's very social. Matter of fact, there's one couple of appraisers that during this pandemic, every Sunday night, we have FaceTime dinner with them. I think we've missed 3 for the last year and a half. So that's great. But because we paid our own way, we get to the show, there's no guarantee that we're going to get on television. I mean, it's a matter of people coming in and showing up with something not only that's interesting, but that they don't know too much about it. I mean, sometimes people come in with great items, but they know everything there is to know about. They know more than we know about it. That's not going to get on TV either. But in any way, so you're hoping as an appraiser that someone comes in with something good, you'd get tape for TV, because otherwise you don't get on TV. You've spent all this time and money. In any case, and the ideal for an appraiser is like 8:30 in the morning. Someone comes in with something good. You see it, you call a producer over, they look at it, they talk with everybody, go on TV with it. By 9:30, you've taped. The rest of the day is really easy. But if you haven't taped and it's getting to be 4 or 5 in the afternoon, it's a really tense day. In any case, there was a show in, it was Kansas City. And this man comes in early in the morning, and he has a few things signed by Pope John Paul. They were nice, but they weren't anything special. But then he pulls out a bunch of 8x10 photographs. Turned out he was the pilot who flew the Pope and his entourage around the country when he visited. And there was one picture in particular. Now, usually when you see pictures of people with the Pope, it's very, very formal. The Pope is in his full vestments. He's standing there with his hand out in his ring. People are kneeling and kissing the ring. I mean, it's a very formal situation. This picture was the pilot was in his uniform, sitting in the pilot seat. the Pope was behind him with one leg way up in the air, reaching over this man's shoulder, signing his Bible. And I'm going, this is great. And the man had stories about the entourage and the goings on behind the scenes. I'm just beside this is great. And I go, let me see the Bible. He goes, oh, I didn't bring that. I'm going, can you go get it? And he goes, well, no, it's in a safe deposit box. The bank's closed today. And I go, oh, I did tape something later that day, but it was like, oh, this was perfect. Another thing that comes up many times when I'm talking about books is people ask if I collect books or if I don't, or what's the most valuable book that I've seen. And I've seen some great items, and I really don't collect books. And one of the reasons I don't collect books is when I was growing up, my father would bring home 4, 5, 6 books a day. Do that for 30, 40 years. You can imagine what our house looked like. He meant to read a book. He meant to read a paragraph, read an introduction, read whatever, but there were heaps and piles. So I tend to read a lot, but I bring the books back. Now, my wife did have a collection of 1,000 books on jazz, which she sold a few years ago. Part of the reason was she felt that 10 years from now, nobody's going to really know who these musicians are. And the second reason is we had a customer who was really interested, really wanted it. And she said, it's time. So she let it go. One book that I will mention, I won't tell you exactly why, but there's a John Grisham book called Camino Island. It's a couple of years ago he came out with it. It's a mystery and murder about a bookseller. Let me just say that I actually talked to John Grisham about the book. He said, I owe you a dinner, because there's a character in the book who I had never met him. I didn't know him, but if you read it, it's pretty obvious that my name has changed, but it's me, which was fun, except let's say I was not portrayed in the best of ways. I haven't gotten my dinner from John Grisham yet, but I will collect, even if I have to go down to Charlottesville, North Carolina, I'll get it. But so I don't collect, but there is one collection we have that started as a bit of a joke. I'll just hold this up. Before dust jackets were widely and popularly used, which is around World War I, there were dust jackets going back, but a lot of books had very decorative covers. And the reason they had decorative covers was the publishers figured that if you walked into a store and the book caught your eye, more chance you'd buy it. And there are people who collect these books just for the decorative covers. Individually, they might not seem like much, but as a collection, they can be very nice. And you can pick them up at library sales, bookstores, auctions, antique stores, a lot of them very cheaply. Some are expensive, but you can really put together a collection that can be a lot of fun and not spend a lot of money. And we have a collection like that ourselves that started as a bit of a joke. One day I got a book in, it had a picture of a toilet on the cover. And the title of the book was Flushed with Pride, The Life of Thomas Crapper, invented the toilet. I brought it home, I showed it to my wife. She took one look at it and said, you have to put that in the bathroom, or we have to put it in the bathroom. So I did. A couple of days later, actually, I got another book in, and it had in the middle of the book a big eye staring out of the cover. The title was We Never Sleep. It was a history of the Pinkerton Detective Agency, but with a big eye staring at you. I thought, put that in the bathroom too. Now, this is a little half bathroom, so there's no shower, no steam. Next thing you know, we built bookshelves, and now there are 300-400 of these Victorian style illustrated book covers and books in the bathroom. People walk in, they're a little taken aback, loads of reading material. And one of the rules of the collection is that nothing can be valuable, because every once in a while a book falls off the shelf and you can imagine where it ends up. One other collection that I do have, and this is a little hard to show, but this is one page. You'll see all sorts of notes, but then very close, just either words or a sentence or so on. Every single one of these pages is a story, or what every single, there's page after page. Whoops, there goes about 5 pages of stories. But what I do is I write down and I collect stories. And one of the things that I've said that I could do is I could take this page, put it up on a wall, throw a dot, and I could do a whole lecture just doing that. Matter of fact, looking at one here. Okay. Sometimes what can be frustrating, you get a call, you set up an appointment to go to someone's house, and you get to the house, you get to the morning that you're going to go out, you get a call, sorry, we have to postpone, we can't do it. And most of them, the reasons are perfectly reasonable. It happens. It's just a little frustrating because you blocked out that time and you could be doing something else, but it happens. Every once in a while, it happens a few times. And we had a regular customer, and this must be going back 20 years ago. Friend of ours, nice guy, was having some problems, and he had a storage area in Cambridge. It was a very nice storage area. It had electricity in the units and whatever, but he called up and said, I've got a lot of books. Could you come out and look at it? And I said, fine. He called up, sorry, there's something came up. I can't do it. This happened 4 times. And I finally said to him, Russ, if this happens again, just forget it. It's not, I blocked out too much time. It's just frustrating. You know, we're still friends, but I don't want to do this. Of course, the 5th appointment comes up and Russ calls and says, you can't come. He goes, it's not me. You just can't come. The storage area is closed down. And what had happened, there was a lady who many years ago, it was very sad. She had been in a very abusive marriage. Her husband had run out on her 30 years before. She had had the storage unit and so on, and he was gone. In any case, the lady was dying. She was literally on her deathbed. Her daughter was with her, and she goes to her daughter, I have a storage unit. In the storage unit is a freezer. In the freezer is your father. It turns out he had been abusive. She had murdered him. She had killed him. She brought him to the storage area, put him in a freezer. Now it had electricity. He had been there for 30, he was abusive. Nobody assumed that he ran off alcoholic. So the police were there. The storage unit was closed. When I heard that story from Russ, I said, okay, that's a good excuse. It actually was on the news that night, so it confirmed. I have to admit, that's probably one of the more unusual reasons for somebody not being there. And what I got out of it was a great story. Another time, I'm just looking at another one here. I was out, I got called to Drake it to look at a house, got to the house. No one said very much about it, but I went out there anyways. It was a little post-World War II ranch house, nothing special. They had some nice books. Then on the kitchen table, and it was an old Formica table, probably been furnished when it was built. There was this big, huge roll of paper. And it was a teletype roll. It was a big, huge roll. Turned out it was the manuscript for On the Road. It was Jack Kerouac wrote it in stream of consciousness. So he had a roll that just kept going through. But this was the original manuscript. Turned out Jack Kerouac was this man's uncle. I got to pick it up. I got to hold it. I got to unroll it about a few feet. It was too fragile. I got to touch it. Now, they eventually sold it for $2.5 million. That I wasn't going to do. And so again, when you get called out, I deal with this type of material all the time, and you never know what you're going to see. I'll tell one last story, and then I'll see if there are a few questions. If anyone does have a question, type it in to the chat at the bottom of your screen. If not, I can just keep going and going. And one person or two people did send in emails of a few appraisals they wanted ahead of time. I'll do those too, but I'll tell two things. One, I got a call from a museum. They were loaning something to another museum and they just needed an appraisal for insurance. And they told me what it was. And I was a member of the museum and I said, look, I'll do it for free. You know, it's the appraisals like this on me. But I said, I don't want to do it from a copy. I don't want to do it from a website. I want to see the item, the actual item. And they said, fine, just, make an appointment. We'll come by. You can look at it. A 4-page handwritten account of Paul Revere's ride by Paul Revere. I mean, that even exists. And I got to hold it, touch it. I mean, I deal with this type of material. And when you touch something that Paul Revere wrote, or Thomas Jefferson, or Albert Einstein, it still sends a chill up your spine. There's still that thrill there that this person touched that. They held it. They put their thoughts down. It's amazing. Are there any questions? Sure.
Yep, I'm not seeing any questions in the message
Well,
box.
if anybody wants to find, what I'll do is someone sent in 3 or 4 books for appraisal, and someone sent in another book for appraisal that I'm also going to email them. They might not have been able to join tonight, but it leads into a couple of last stories.
Wonderful, thanks.
The first person sent in, and there were 3 books. One was a Boston guidebook by Edward Bacon. It's a wonderful guidebook. It's 100 years old. There are many, many editions of it. It usually sells in the $10 to $25 range. But one of the reasons that this guidebook is so available and there's so many of them show up. In other words, you can have a book that's 100, 200 years old, and if there are a lot of them around, they're not going to be terribly valuable. On the other hand, you can have books that are incredibly rare, almost impossible to get. But if the people looking for them are even rarer, they're not valuable because nobody wants it. But one of the reasons this is a very good guidebook of Boston, but it was also the guidebook that whenever conventions came to Boston, all through the teens, 20s, 30s, every conventioneer got a copy of this book usually. So there are literally thousands and thousands of them. $10, $25. The other one is 2 years before The Mast. It's a 1921 illustrated edition. It's a perfectly nice edition, but it was probably done 80 years after the book first came out, the first edition by Dana. Again, it's a $10, $20 book. And the last one is by Tennyson, The Holy Grail, printed in Boston. He was the poet laureate of Great Britain. It was first done in Great Britain. So all 3 books are really good books, really good reading, not terribly valuable because they're not asked for. I'll end a little. Now, one of the things is I usually talk for about an hour. Now, if anybody after this or sees the recording of this and has any questions, don't hesitate to get in touch with us. Don't hesitate to send pictures. We'd rather have 100 people call with nothing special than to have 100 first person say, I just threw away, and we go, that's worth a fortune. So don't hesitate. The other thing that I tell people about asking questions, when you ask a question of a person who enjoys and loves what they do, the problem isn't getting an answer. It's getting them to stop answering. So I'll end on 2 things. One, a lot of times, and this is a very appropriate time and season to talk about this, people ask me, what's the most valuable book that you've handled? And I've handled things that are amazing. I was a chemistry major, so I know science. One time I got called, another appraisal, not to buy, I got called, and they had a first edition of Isaac Newton's Principia Mathematica from the 1600s. It's the foundation of modern mathematics. A first edition of that book sells for over $1 million. I'm holding it. This was Isaac Newton's copy that he wrote marginal notes in. I mean, it's hard to pray, but it would 10 times that. But in any case, the school that had that was Babson College. Babson College, then the Isaac Newton collection, because Roger Babson was a wealthy industrialist early in the century, liked Isaac Newton, he collected it. Those books went to MIT in a collection, but the collection then got moved to California to a library. A few years ago, I was in Pasadena. I went to that library. There was that book. And even though it was under glass, lock and key, I could say, I touched that book. But so I get things like that, or I've had first editions of almost all the famous books and like letters and documents and so on, a lot of fun. But the book that I consider the most valuable book and what means most to me, I have a copy of The Night Before Christmas. That copy, most people would not consider particularly special. It's nicely illustrated and so on. But that one copy, every Christmas Eve, I have read to my daughters, and they're in their 30s now. From that copy, and now I have one grandson who is 1.5 years. I have a new one who not quite yet ready for reading to, consider he was born today. But I have read it to them every single Christmas Eve. I've read it to my grandson. Now, you have to realize one of my daughters, like I say, lives in Nairobi. FaceTime, Christmas Eve, I read that copy, that particular book, show her the illustrations. My other daughter, her husband is from Texas. They live in the Boston area, but many times for Christmas, they go down to Texas. Before FaceTime, I had to put it on YouTube so that she could listen to it. So that particular copy of The Night Before Christmas means more to me, and I consider it more valuable than almost any other book I have. Okay, I'll finish the talk talking about Bibles, and the next, it's sort of led in because the next person that might not be listening sent in pictures of an old family Bible. And I probably get 5 and 10 calls a week with people who have 100, 200-year-old family Bibles. In most cases, we have to say to them, if this is your family Bible and it's been handed down through the generations, sentimentally, it's priceless, but monetarily, maybe not so much. Now, you take those big, beautiful family Bibles in beautiful leather binding with all the clasps, perfect condition. They sell $100 to $300 because they make wonderful gifts. Ministers, priests, divinity students, whatever. Break one clasp, have one hinge go, they lose all that value. Now, sometimes in the beginning, middle, or end of those talks, you will see them, and they have the histories. And then what you can do is usually the historians only want that page or the title page. They don't want the whole big Bible. It's always worth checking. Because there are Bibles. This is the Gutenberg Bible, the first printed book that's worth tens of millions of dollars. Pages are worth $100,000. There are other Bibles that's worth checking. Actually, I'm going to add in 2 stories at the very end. One, well, I don't know how Nahant feels about this, but it's still a good story. We were one time out to dinner with a bunch of people in the North End, and it was a group. There was probably 8 or 10 of us, and a few of the people lived in the North End. My father was there. And, we were having a very nice dinner, and my father turns around at the other end of the restaurant in a private room. Another group of men, they actually, obviously my father recognized them. He goes running over. Now, a couple of people at our table were cringing. My father goes running over to that table, and you hear, George, It was the Angiulo family. There was the four brothers there, and they're going, "Hi, George, how are you?" And it was very obvious. My father had absolutely no idea who they really were, but they had worked on the Sacco Vanzetti case. He had worked on the Sacco Vanzetti. So they were good friends from the Sacco Vanzetti. They didn't invite him out to their house in Nahant for the summer, but it was like, you realize that you make connections that are different. In any case, the Bible story. See, I get all, I got called, and this is how I'll end the talk. I got called out to a large old church in Boston, well over 100-year-old church. And over the years, they had they had a very large library. They had accumulated a lot of books. They wanted me there to just look through and just see if they had any rare books. I actually spent a day there. They actually did have some good books. It was fun. At the end of the day, the priest said to me, "Could you come down the basement? There are a few more books." I went down the basement. There were a few more books. And then off in the corner, there was a closet. Actually, it was more like a small room. And the priest opened the door, front to back, floor to ceiling, top to bottom. It was stuffed with thousands of old books, of Bibles, thousands of old Bibles. And I looked at the priest and I said, "What is this?" And he said, "Well, people hate to throw away a book. They feel it's sacrilegious to throw away a Bible. So what happens when a family member dies and the family doesn't want their Bible? They come and they present it to the church." And he says, "What do? We very graciously accept it. Then we go downstairs, open the door, put it in with the rest of them." And he says, "And we can't drive a dumpster up to the back of the church and fill it full of Bibles. That just would be terrible." So I use it as an example to say that if you want to give something to a charity, ask them if they want it first. If they want it and can use it, great. But if all you're doing is taking your own, you're not doing anyone a favor. In any case, I'll end there. I'll say again, if you like the stories, Brattlecast, like I say, get it through Apple or whatever, or through our website. I have about 100. I put one out every 2 weeks, and I just ramble on story after story after story. Thank you. I just hope for all of our sakes, well, first of all, have a wonderful holiday, but I hope for all of our sakes, maybe somewhere down the road, we can say, "I'm coming to the Nahant Library." We'll do an appraisal day. People can bring in piles and piles of books, and we can do it in person, because no matter how great Zoom and remote is, actually seeing people, talking with them, it's just a much better thing. But thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And
Agreed, Ken. Thank you so much.
And-
I have one quick question.
Oh, okay, sure.
Since you talked about the C. Clement Moore the night before Christmas, all right, settle this trivia question. The last page. Happy Christmas to all, or Merry Christmas to all?
I'm pretty sure it's Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night. One other thing that I will say, when I do a talk like this, people don't realize it. My wife likes to joke with me. I only work half a day, 12 hours. I get to work at 5:30 in the morning. I will tell people I do answer the phone. So, and then the store closes at 5:30. It's only 12 hours, half a day. And when I do talks like this, I even do it, but I love what I do. It's fun. If you have questions, you have books and pictures, call, ask, whatever. I love it. Thank you.
Yeah, fascinating to have your stories. And yes, I hope that we can meet together soon. Have wonderful holidays, and everybody listening in, have wonderful holidays. Thanks so much.
Good night.